Hello and welcome to the Green Voice podcast. I'm Grant Ervin with S&B USA here in the Point Park Center for Media Innovation back in the studio. And today I have with me Emily DeMasi from EOS at Federated Hermes. Emily, how are you today?
Really good, really good. We're just talking about getting the kids back at school and yeah, early day, but happy to be here down in Point Park. Beautiful day.
Beautiful day here in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, as they always are. So how did the first day of school go for you so far?
Yeah, not bad. Everyone seemed happy on the way out the door. Let's just hope they're happy when they come back.
What is the school day for your kids? You have two kids, correct?
Yeah, two kids. So our 8th grader left on the bus at 7:20. Think he'll be back around 3:20, and just an hour later for my daughter.
Were they excited?
They were, yeah.
Okay.
Like I said, smiling. I don't know if excited. Are they ever excited to stop summer break?
Probably not. Yeah. My girls are going back next week, and they started, camps, like soccer camp and everything this past week. So they're kind of easing into it. But yeah, I think I asked my soon-to-be 11-year-old, I was like, are you bored with summer? And she's like, no, but, so there's kind of that, I think, energy towards fall.
Yeah, definitely.
Pointing in that direction.
And you can feel it here at Point Park. You see the students on campus, doing orientation, and you can feel the good energy.
It's exciting. And it's funny to watch the freshmen, too, I think, because everybody's, heads are looking up and where am
wide-eyed.
I? Oh, those times and that period in life. So the excitement of it all.
For sure.
Well, I'm super excited to have you here on the Green Voice. And we've been trying to get you on here for a while, and so finally made it happen. And we're excited about that. And so, one of the things I just always love to do with guests is just to kind of get to know them a little bit and learn a little bit about like your career trajectory and kind of how you came to kind of your position and what you're working on currently. So maybe a little bit about your history first.
Absolutely. I think I was really inclined to do this because we've had recent interns at EOS, at Federated Hermes, and many of them were really excited to find out that they could have a career in sustainability in the financial services sector. And the truth of that is that there's tons of stuff that you could do in the financial services sector, sustainability being but one of them. But I love to get the word out that, you can indeed have a positive impact from a sustainability perspective, even in the financial services sector. And that's a little bit about my journey as well. So I grew up around Pittsburgh. Born and raised in Aliquippa, Pennsylvania. Nice. I am a Quip fan.
The place where legends are made, right?
All legends are made there. Yeah, there's something in the water. But yeah, just my parents still live there, and just really wanted to see the world, a true Yinzer, but didn't really know that I'd end up back in Pittsburgh. And really happy to be here. But I went to Boston University for my undergraduate, and I studied international relations. Fell in love with Boston. It's a nice city. And then shortly after that, joined the Peace Corps, actually. I just want to have an impact. Yeah. And I was feeling, young, naive, idealistic.
Where were you stationed at?
Ivory Coast, Côte d'Ivoire, West Africa. Yeah. And, spent 2 years there working in water and sanitation and women in development.
Interesting.
And doing a lot of HIV, AIDS education. And got evacuated, actually, in 2001 when there was a coup d'etat.
Oh, wow.
And found myself back in the U.S. about 3 months earlier than I had planned to be.
Okay.
And wasn't quite sure what my next move should be.
Sounds like there's a movie script in there or a book.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so kind of found myself not knowing what my next step would be. And my now husband and I, who we met when I was in Boston, and I went back to Boston after getting evacuated. We just wanted to live in New York for the thrill of it, the experience of it. And so found myself in New York without a job. So I went to a placement agency, headhunter, if you will. Yeah. And they're like, what skills do you have? And I had an undergrad degree, right, in international relations. I had learned to speak French.
You were like, I've survived a coup d'etat.
I survived that. And they were like, but can you really speak French? And I'm like, yeah, I think so. I did it for 2 years. That's how I lived. And they're like, great. We have this private equity placement firm that's based in Paris.
Okay.
And they want to open up an office here in New York. And they need someone to help them get their office set up, do all the administration. But you have to be able to talk to the partners in French.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, sign me up. So I find myself on Park Avenue. So from Ivory Coast, West Africa to Park Avenue, New York.
Big shock.
Big. Yeah. So many, kind of ironies there, like, one place to the other. And I started helping this firm set up their shop on Park Avenue. Really enjoyed the work. So for the first 2 years, it was very kind of like office management and, just getting our licenses, SEC and all of that. But then I started to talk to the investors more, and the partners were like, hey, you're not bad at that. And if you want to sit for your series exams, like, you can become an associate and actually go out with our clients and try to start raising money for private equity funds.
Okay.
So I did that, passed my series 7 and 11, and ended up going kind of all over the U.S., helping raise funds for different global private equity funds.
Okay.
And in doing that, started to go to a lot of conferences. Now, again, talking about the irony of a place where I lived for 2 years where there were very little financial resources.
Abject poverty.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then working in private equity where I couldn't even conceive of the amounts of money that institutional investors and family offices were making in some of these, what seemed to me at the time kind of like odd funds, right? So like a leveraged buyout fund, healthcare, and I was just like, if these two worlds could somehow meet, what impact, there could be. And one of the conferences I went to was a renewable energy conference.
Okay.
And
now you would go to these conferences to work with clients and...
Yeah, to work with clients, to find new clients. So a lot of the like LPs, would be there. Family offices would also go, to see like what was up on, coming up on the horizon. And so I went back like all excited to the firm, and I was like, I can do this. Like, if you tell me that I'm out there hustling, raising money for like renewable energy funds, I can do that all day, right? I'm all in. And they're like, well, that's great, but your job is to cultivate investor relationships in the U.S. and Australia.
Okay.
And this was in 2006.
Okay.
2006, 2007.
So pre kind of 2008.
Yeah. Pre-financial
crisis.
And they're like, and the Australians already get this sort of renewable energy and responsible investment. And they were like, and Americans don't want it. So
at that time.
So if you're not on board kind of with...
The adventurous Aussies are all in.
Oh, they're all in. They're all in. But you don't need to cultivate that, right? Like they've already got it covered. And I was bummed, right? And I was like, oh, but there's a real opportunity here. I really like to think of myself as a bit of a visionary, thinking, no, this is going to catch on in the U.S., right? It's coming. But they were like, thank you.
It's like fashion trends in Pittsburgh. We're just a little
behind, but not that far.
Not that far.
Yeah,
you can
not
see it
that
around
far.
the corner.
Yeah, absolutely. And very supportive of me, but at the same time was like, look, this is where our focus is, and we're not really going to expand that way. And I was like, okay, but then I got a bug in me about like, well, wait, I see this connection, right? I see this connection between capital markets and potential impact. So took the opportunity to apply to grad schools because at that time I only had my undergrad. Okay. Private equity is a very male-dominated industry, and it was kind of called out a lot that I was the only woman in the room. I was typically the least educated in the room. Most of my peers had master's degree.
Or like a CFA.
Or a CFA or something like that. And so I knew if I wanted to get ahead, then a advanced degree would be in my future. So I came back to Pittsburgh. Okay. I went to Duquesne University.
Nice.
And my husband actually went to Chatham University. We're big Pittsburgh fans. In fact, he fell in love with Pittsburgh and is a good part of the reason why we moved back, even though he's Boston born and bred.
Oh, that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is getting a little long. Trying to speed up a little bit. So let's just say I went back, got my Master of Business Administration and Master of Public Policy, focused all my work on how we can incentivize companies to be more ethical,
Sure.
better corporate citizens. And as soon as I graduated, started looking for jobs where I can put all of that academia to work. And I found it actually back in Boston. Boston has a thriving socially responsible investing
Okay.
industry. And I had my first job at Zevin Asset Management. I worked under Robert Zevin, who is sometimes known as the grandfather of socially responsible investing.
Interesting.
He was pivotal in the divestment from apartheid South Africa during the time.
Yeah.
And he taught me everything I know about portfolio management and gave me a chance, even though I was very green. I didn't take any of the finance courses because I was taking all of the public policy courses to do my dual degree.
Okay.
But I spent
But you
5
spent
years.
time with him.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And he was a huge believer that learning on the job was sometimes even better than just having the academic background. And he truly believed that women were better portfolio managers than men because they knew how to manage risk better. Whether that actually
Interesting.
plays out, I don't know. But it was really nice to find in the financial services industry a man who thought being a woman was actually an advantage rather than a
He's
disadvantage.
probably an insurance actuary. That he probably has that experience. You ever see those numbers?
No, I haven't.
There's a whole host of like actuarial insurance data where you look at the risk profiles of men versus women, and women are safer
Yeah.
at
Okay.
certain ages. There's like different kind of things, but
Yeah.
like, because guys do stupid stuff, like they like jump off of boxes or whatever, and they're like, "Why'd you hurt your back?" Well, that's why. Whereas a woman's like, "Why would you even do
Why
that?
would you
Why would you do
jump
that?"
off a box?
Yeah. But that makes a lot of sense though.
Yeah, and he was a great mentor to me. I spent 5 years with him at Zevin Asset Management, worked my way up from an assistant portfolio manager to a portfolio manager, ended up moving with him from Zevin Asset Management to North Star Asset Management, also located in Boston, and kind of switched my role from portfolio manager to high net worth wealth management. But all the time, we were doing responsible investing, meaning we were using what I guess a lot of people call ESG criteria now,
Yeah.
but at the time we just thought about as sustainability issues,
Mm-hmm.
as screens on some of the things we would invest in or would not invest in, and also positive, so opportunities around those companies that were doing really well or really good for their customers, environment, or their people.
That's interesting. A couple questions I was curious about that. One is that taking that positive approach, right,
Yeah.
versus using a positive screen versus a negative screen.
Yeah.
You hear a lot about this in like divest conversations and things now currently in the ESG space, whether it's climate or other types of issues. Talk about the advantage of positive screening versus negative,
Yeah, well, so
or the difference. Maybe it's
yeah.
what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. So a negative screen is something that becomes not part of your investable universe for whatever reason. As you said, maybe it's climate, maybe it's oil and gas companies. So there are investors out there who will say, we're going to put a negative screen on those things. We won't invest in them at all. Then there is the positive side of that, where you take a look at things like companies that are setting ambitious climate targets. Companies that
50% emissions reduction by 2030.
exactly net zero by 2050.
Right.
Those companies that are very vocal and have a robust strategy around their energy transition plans. From an S side, looking at companies that are really supporting workers, whether that be thinking about living wage and paying living wage to frontline workers, including mental health benefits as part of a package for all workers, or looking at, some of the cognitive diversity metrics that they want to increase in their companies. So whether you're looking through like a racial, ethnic, or gender lens, disability lens, but those companies who are actively investing in those types of opportunities, that also becomes a screen. So you want to invest in those companies because you believe that by focusing on those certain issues and by investing in them, that it's going to increase eventually the long-term value for shareholders.
And your performance of that portfolio, right?
Exactly.
That's interesting. Another thing I was curious about too, I hear a lot of these terms now in this ESG space is for the non-investor, what's the difference between private equity and a family office? Like
Yeah.
Are they similar, different?
Well, I think it depends on like in which context you're speaking about it. So private equity is basically just any investment that's not offered in the public markets.
Okay.
That could come
Like
in
municipal bonds is an example of something in the public
in the
markets.
public market,
Right.
right? But that would be on the fixed income side, so like the bond side. So private equity can be anything from a hedge fund to what is actually called a private equity fund. And a family office, though, is usually its own investment office. So they are created typically by a family, high net worth family, or a group of high net worth families for the intent of building wealth for that family. And so they're not really the same things. You'll have family offices investing in private equity.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like a private equity might have a specific purpose, like renewable energy or something like
Right.
of that sort, versus a family office is looking at basically managing that wealth and putting irons in various fires.
Exactly. And
Okay.
private equity would usually be just a sleeve of the asset allocation that that family office would invest in.
Okay, so like you could have a family office that invests in a renewable private equity fund. They expect X amount of return or whatever, and they would do that instead of investing in a mutual fund or something of that sort.
Or in parallel.
Or in
Right.
parallel.
Yeah. Or yeah. I mean, diversification is the
Yes.
rule of the game.
The rule of the game.
But caveat: I am no longer an investment professional, so nothing that I say should be deemed
Taken.
as professional advice.
Right.
I'm talking about a different period in my life, but we got to sort of that divestment conversation, right? And this brings us to my current role, which is an engager.
Well, hold on. Before you go there, when did you come back to Pittsburgh?
I came back to Pittsburgh in 2000.
Okay.
So mid-COVID. Selling and buying a house during that time was
So
intense.
2020.
2020.
Okay.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. Sight unseen, joined this new team that was being started here in Pittsburgh,
Okay.
EOS at Federated Hermes. The team EOS, which the history of that name is Equity Ownership Services. But it was created for one particular pension fund back in the UK, back in the day, and it no longer the EOS part of it, the acronym kind of maintained when we became a service for other institutional investors.
Was it give me a little company history there, because I think a lot of folks in Pittsburgh are familiar with the Federated name, and so EOS at Federated Hermes. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, like, what's the history and trajectory there?
Yeah, that it's a good one. And this is something that we have to talk to companies about a lot, because when EOS at Federated Hermes is engaging with a company, and we'll talk more about what engaging means, we're doing it on behalf of EOS's clients.
Okay.
Okay. So EOS represents about 70 institutional investors with an aggregate of $1.9 trillion of assets under advice. And Federated, our parent company, and Hermes, the UK-based company that Federated ended up acquiring, are also part of our clients.
Okay.
So we're engaging on behalf of
Federated.
not only Federated, not only Hermes,
Oh, interesting.
but 60 plus other institutional investors on behalf of their investee companies.
And so Federated Hermes is one of your clients,
Yes.
in a sense.
Yes, Federated, the parent company,
Okay.
and Hermes are one of our clients. And so the history of that there is Federated acquired Hermes and really appreciated the long history of sustainability integration that they had in their funds, and wanted to have that as part of their entire footprint. And so through a series of acquisitions, Federated Hermes then became a combined group.
Okay.
EOS is a subsidiary of the Hermes Limited name.
Got it.
And as part of that acquisition and dedication to integration, Federated built out the team in North America and I was part of the big hiring
Oh,
process.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
So, and really kind of an interesting piece of the Federated history too, in terms of, I think, like I said, it's a name that people recognize in Pittsburgh. You have a building, you have kind of a part of the skyline,
Yeah.
but understanding like that type of intricacy of the work that they do, I think is one of the things that, isn't often talked about, right?
Yeah.
The global impact that the company makes, right?
Absolutely. And it's an exciting time actually for all of Federated Hermes because EOS is celebrating our 20th anniversary of stewardship and engagement this year. It's also the 70th anniversary of Federated and the 50th anniversary of money markets. So,
Oh, wow.
and that's Federated's bread and butter, right?
Money
It's like
market
the money
funds.
market funds.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot to celebrate this year at Federated Hermes.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about engagement.
Yeah.
You mentioned that. Like, I think for listeners and myself included, like, what is engagement and why is it important? I think, from an investor's point of view.
Yeah. I wanted to get back to that because you had mentioned about screening out and maybe divestment. And EOS is a stewardship service, which means that we are engaging with companies on various issues pertaining to sustainability, strategy, and capital allocation. And by the very nature of that, first of all, we're not investors, EOS. We are just the stewardship provider. But we want to be invested all over because we then have a seat at the table to influence, to, engage with companies on some of these critical issues like climate strategy, like worker rights. And we want to be in those companies. And so divestment is not a part of what we do. We engage on a daily basis with large companies on, these types of strategies and how really social and environmental issues can actually, help their strategy.
Right.
And how is it part of their business model and how are people compensated for it? So that's what we do.
So it's a lot of listening and learning about the various companies and kind of their interactions and what's material to their business and what their business is.
Yeah.
Do you what are some of the things that you pick up, I guess? I mean, don't use names or anything like that, but like, you have I'm going to assume a very intimate knowledge of a lot of companies.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so walking into that, what are some of the skills that you deploy in terms of listening and sharing?
Yeah, we were just talking about actually like tools of engagement and like, how you can really use these different tools to help drive forward some progress at companies. And I mean, I think the first one is that you have to be a great researcher. You need to understand a company as well as you possibly can, because you had said that sort of magic word, materiality. Now that means different things to different people. So what we like to say is the financial connectivity. What is the financial connectivity of some of these topics that we're addressing with companies? So you want to go into a meeting and sort of establish your understanding and knowledge of the company. It puts you on a good sort of playing ground with the company, that you've done your homework and what of those issues you want to talk to them about and how it might have a financial implication for that company.
How much of it is quantitative and how much of it qualitative?
That's a good question. I mean, a lot of the climate discussions can take a very deep quantitative route, if you will, because there's a lot of data out there behind,
fuel, energy,
GHG emissions,
scope 1, scope 2,
yeah,
scope
EV,
3 data.
Electric vehicles and penetration, all of that. The issues that I typically focus on, which are more of the S issues, so I lead our human capital theme, those are a bit harder to get very quantitative with, because things like culture, inclusion, there's not a good way at this moment to to really get quantitative data on that. How do you measure culture? How do you measure happiness? How do you measure safety? I mean, even
Right.
safety, not, I mean, by numbers of, workers, incident reports.
Yeah.
But I'm talking more about like the feeling of safety, maybe like
Mm.
women in the workplace.
Oh, interesting.
Do they feel like it's
Do
a
I
safe
feel safe?
environment for them to work? Like those things are harder to measure. And it's some of the only data that is not required to be published from a company. So, for example, some of the things we would ask companies for is, look, you have to file your EEO1 workforce demographic data on an annual basis. So just as a starting point, maybe publish that, right? Just so we
be
can
transparent.
understand the composition of your workforce, so we can understand if your workforce is growing or declining, and to see where any gaps might be. So that's the type of thing we might explicitly ask for. But we, again, want to make sure that it is financially connected and material to the company. So workforce, for example. I had mentioned living wage, but we also talk about minimum wage and benefits. We talk to almost all of the retail companies about frontline workers, how many are full time, how many are part time, who has access to benefits, what benefits. The cost benefit analysis of offering more, whether that's been done, if they might consider a living wage, which is nowhere near where most minimum wages are set.
True.
And so that will be more important to those companies with large, low-wage workforces than it might be for, say, healthcare or tech companies. There, when we're looking at the workforce, we're looking more about inclusion and are there gaps in their talent pools? Are they really going out and, getting the whole of what is possible from the talent pool? And so even within the themes that we're engaging on, there's nuance when you're thinking about the sector, but also a specific company.
Do you see that, there's so much good stuff there, like differences between, say, U.S.-based companies and other regions of the world?
Yeah.
A. And then B, how has the pandemic in particular shifted conversations around the importance of human capital? Has there been a shift? I mean, I'm making a big assumption there because I feel it.
Yeah.
But how has that inflection point changed this conversation?
Yeah. Well, two really good points. First, we're a global team. I lead the North American regional team for EOS.
So you're just looking at North American companies?
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah, U.S. and Canada. But we also have an Asia and emerging markets team and a European team.
Okay.
And so
3 EOS pods.
Yes, 3 EOS pods. We're located here in Pittsburgh. The 2 other teams are located in the UK. But yes, we're looking at global companies. And to your point in question, yes, there are major differences between the different markets and the maturity of conversation around sustainability issues, the openness to talking about sustainability issues, and really how you can engage on certain things. Because, for example, diversity in Japan is not going to be the same as diversity in North America.
True.
And so it's
just all
crafted.
Makeup.
Yeah, just the culture, the makeup, the issues that they're going to have to focus on, or they're going to want to engage companies on. They just don't have the same makeup of demographics as other parts of the world. So all of that has to be crafted and thought about through that market lens.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. So do they start to influence one another, or does that make terminology difficult in some cases? Or
yeah, I mean,
because it's not a monolith, right?
No, definitely not a monolith. And does it influence? I mean, I think that the interest that European investors have taken in sustainability issues and bringing that to the U.S. market has had a huge influence on the uptake and the interest of non-European investors in sustainability issues and have really advanced the conversation here.
Particularly on the E and the S side.
Exactly, the E and the S. Yeah, G is paramount, and
we don't talk about it enough.
We don't talk about it enough, and honestly, any of the E and S issues eventually get linked back to G anyways.
You have to have leadership. You have to have the right construction.
Yeah. And this goes to, has there been a change because of COVID? And the answer is absolutely yes. The dependence on and importance of frontline workers became absolutely apparent during the pandemic.
Particularly in like retail and healthcare, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And when you think about, Target, for example, had one of its best performing quarters or years during the pandemic. And why was that?
We needed sweatpants, we needed TVs.
All the toilet paper that was unavailable.
Right.
But not only that, but really employing the in-store shoppers and their shipped workers who were doing all the shopping and bringing it to, us.
They had to shift their workforce.
Exactly.
Wow.
And, giving maybe low-wage frontline workers sick pay for the first time ever, right? And, and having things in the healthcare sector, backup childcare, which is crucial for women in the workplace.
Yep.
But no one had really thought about, well, how can we make it work when there are no schools open? And who's doing the home teaching? I mean, I'm not going to make any assumptions here, but a lot of that work falls to
Mom.
the female, caretaker in the household. And so they're like, okay, what can we do to keep things running and make sure that women can get into work? Okay, emergency health, backup childcare. And we've talked to some healthcare companies that said that was so valued, and we heard so many good things from our employees, we kept it.
I was going to ask that. Like, are there things that have been kept, innovations that have occurred as a result of the pandemic? And then are there things out there that, like, got left on the cutting room floor that should probably be picked up?
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've been engaging around those things because there were some companies that had implemented accrual of paid sick leave and paid sick leave for all workers during the pandemic.
Yep.
But now, I mean, we are on the other side, still coming out on the other side. And some companies are doing away with it, saying, oh, well, we don't need it anymore.
Oh, no.
And we're like, but wait a second.
Yeah. Didn't you learn your lesson?
Exactly. So you are not incentivizing your workforce that interacts with your customers to stay at home when they're sick, because otherwise they won't earn anything. And think about what is, and this goes back to talking about the business model and the cost benefit analysis of, did you think about if and how much your employees valued that during the time? And when you think about how tight the labor market is, people have their choice right now, of where they want to go work. So are they going to choose? Yeah. Are they going to choose the employee that supports them in health and sickness and having benefits like maybe going back to school, earning a degree, getting training, or the one that says, oh, the pandemic's not going on anymore, so we're going to get rid of our paid sick leave?
You don't matter.
Yeah. So it's interesting. And another major change we saw, if I will, and this goes back to the governance we were talking about, very few boards had a committee that was assigned to look over human capital. It was always kind of considered the purview of management, and the board is to oversee management, not to get into management's way or do their job. But the thing is that the pandemic threw the workforce into such a risk that it then became a subject that was brought up to the board on a quarterly basis. And what we've seen over the last 18 to 24 months is that many of the boards have decided to add human capital to one of their existing committees, like the Nomination and Governance Committee. You'll see those committees change names and be something like the Talent and Governance Committee or the Talent and Nomination Committee.
As a way to look down the field in terms of how do you how do you cultivate the workforce or the workforce of the future?
Not only that, but
Or take care of the existing too.
exactly. They are a critical asset
Wow.
of the company. And if there's not board level oversight there, if you're not understanding like what's coming down the pipeline and changing strategy where
Strategies.
necessary to take care of the workforce, then it could be a huge risk.
That's amazing. Because basically then companies that are starting to do that are in a sense like planning and forecasting for how do we both attract new talent but also retain the existing talent.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's so costly if you can't do either or, right?
Yeah.
Wow. What has this all meant for the investor? Like your background, as we were going into in the beginning, is in socially responsible investing.
Yeah.
How has these changes that you just talked about really started to change the actions of the investor? Like, so you're gathering this information, from the companies that you're engaging with, and then you're packaging it and, creating the information for the investor. What are they starting to either ask for or see or do?
Yeah. So our clients are global institutional investors, many of whom are outside
What's an
the
example
US.
of an institutional investor?
Think of a huge pension fund,
Okay.
or an employee pension fund. So that's a huge institutional investor.
Okay.
And
So like a PSERS or CalPERS, like a state pension
well,
fund.
those are U.S. examples. But so think of like what would be the parallel of that in Japan or Europe or Australia. Like those are the types of investors that we're engaging on behalf, and they are in regulatory environments where if they're signed up to things like the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investing, they're having to report out on how are they being responsible stewards of the capital that they're managing. So all of the information that we are collecting and those issues that we are trying to make some positive momentum on, they're needing that information to report out to their beneficiaries, to their regulatory requirements. And so they're using our data and our engagement as an extension of what they need to be reporting on and how they maintain sort of their responsible accreditation.
So it's a critical component of their due diligence process.
Absolutely.
Wow. And are there things that they're asking of you? Like, hey, what's going on with da-da-da-da? Or like...
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, what's...
I mean, the beauty of EOS is that we are an aggregate service. So we couldn't possibly tailor our engagement approach to 70 different investors. So
you're seeing
we
what
have
those 70
like-minded. Yes, exactly. So our engagement program, which looks out 3 years, we refresh it every year. A huge part of that is a formal survey to our clients about what's important to them, what's emerging, what do they want us to do more of, what do they want us to do less of. And 4 things came out this past year. The first, and which has been the first now for many years, is climate strategy. So, there are multiple net zero commitments. There's the Paris Agreement and alignment, and this is top of every one of our clients' minds.
Because of things like TCFD and the Task Force on Climate Financial Disclosures and...
Yeah, I mean, for lots of reasons. Like, there's been a lot of momentum about, countries that have signed up for Paris alignment. There's the Net Zero Asset Manager initiative where many institutional investors have signed up for that. So they have their own requirements around what they're doing to contribute to a net zero future. And I think just kind of the existential...
People recognize it.
Yeah,
see it.
yeah. That we have to protect the environment if we want our in the long term,
we want to exist
all of
50
our
years
investments,
from now.
to be doing well. So that came out on top. Human capital is another one of those issues because we did kind of redesign our focus during the pandemic on really looking at workers' right and worker voices. And it continues to be a huge area of interest. Human rights, which we've looked at for a long time, like through the supply chains of the companies we're engaging on. And then governance, so board effectiveness. How do boards construct themselves where they have true cognitive diversity, where they have the skills and expertise that they need at the board level to really adapt to an ever-changing environment, which is changing more and more rapidly, right? So one of those, we have 36 sub-themes that I won't go into.
Okay.
But one emerging one is artificial intelligence.
I was going to ask, yeah.
Yeah. And so, how we were talking about the changing workforce and how governance now has a role to play in the oversight. Well, artificial intelligence and the potential displacement of workers is a huge, risk on the horizon. What are you going to do? Are you going to upskill your workers? Are you going to displace your workers? What responsibility does the company have for any of that? If you are deploying it, how are you overseeing potential bias? Do you have ethical principles that underpin it? So it's really complex. And if you don't have that board level oversight expertise or at least education, and it's pretty sector agnostic. I mean, everyone looks at the tech companies and say, what are you doing about AI? But it's being used in healthcare. It's being used in financial services. This is not just a tech issue.
What it's two things, and just as we come to a close here, a couple final questions for you. One of the things I'd be interested to hear. It seems you have this amazing learning environment.
Yeah, for sure.
And in terms of your ability to, both meet clients and people, but the companies. What are some things that you find that are common amongst them all? And I'm thinking really
common amongst all the companies we engage.
Yeah, I would imagine that. Well, there's common threads around the topics and everything, but particularly around issues of like transparency or the ideas of them communicating things.
Yeah.
Are they quick to communicate, or do they hold things close? Is there personalities to different companies is maybe the question.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, all of the work we do is about people.
Right.
And so it's about relationship building, finding the right person at the company to talk to, finding maybe even a champion within the company that would help open doors to some of the decision makers. And so I would say,
because that's not always like a CFO, right?
No, in fact, we shoot for board level conversations.
Okay.
And we often get them, and this is thanks to our clients and the aggregate assets under advice they bring us. Because if you put them all together and take a look at, the largest holdings, we could say, oftentimes we're in the top 20. And you don't have to have 70 conversations. You can have one conversation with us. We'll convey it to the clients. We'll let you know what their expectations are. And it becomes very efficient for a company to talk to us, to get access to, and eliminate sort of the need to have all of those conversations with their institutional investors. I would say a common thread is that, companies are getting a little bit better at responding to requests for engagement. It took some time in the U.S. market to really explain who we are and what what we're all about. Now, again,
they're starting to recognize the value.
Exactly, and we become sort of trusted. We call ourselves critical friends, right? So we both want the same thing, and that is the long-term health of the company.
Yeah.
Right. And so we're not there to call anyone out or to have aggressive conversations. We're there to say, look, we see best practice happening over here with a peer. They've managed to do this.
Do you share that?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's a crucial part to understanding. All right, who are the leaders and who are the laggards, and where does this company stand? And we are happy to share. We saw that in their report, and we think that's best practice. And can you do that? That would be great.
Which has to be a huge benefit.
Oh yeah.
Because I know when you learn what's happening, either with companies that are a similar size or in the same space, like it gives you the confidence to do stuff within your own company.
Yeah.
And you might steal a good idea or two also, I think.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
which everybody
absolutely.
wins.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But the one thing, there are commonalities though. We do a lot of engagement around annual meetings, and executive compensation is a huge part of that conversation. Are we going to recommend
Particularly
supporting? At the board level. Are we going to support CEO pay or recommend supporting it? Or are we going to recommend going against? And the U.S. market is just peculiar in how well they pay their CEOs. And so
more than any other region.
I would say so.
Yeah.
I mean, if we're going to be very generalize here. And it's hard to have those conversations. And it's pretty hard no matter what company you're talking to in the U.S., no matter what sector you're in. Those are hard conversations. Exec remuneration is complex. I think it's unnecessarily complex. And
because of how
those
it's grown
types
in
of
the last 10, 15, 20 years.
How it's grown, just the composition of it. So, if you are awarding stock options that are based on 3 years historic performance, and then you make adjustments to that performance for whatever reason. We saw that a lot during COVID.
Right.
How do you really keep track
Restating
of
earnings
exactly
and things like that?
Like we see that there's lots of ways that CEOs get paid really well during good times, and we want CEOs to get paid well during good times.
Sure.
But you don't see the other effect.
How do they get paid really well during bad times?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so when you say is there commonality, that is probably the most common thing we see.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Just to wrap up here, I'd be interested, you touched a little bit about AI, but like, what are some trends that you see on the horizon that, either on the investor side or on the engagement side that people should keep their eye on?
Yeah. So one thing that is coming up, like shooting up so quickly, is biodiversity and nature-related disclosures. So, we had the TCFD for climate, and now there's the TNFD.
Oh, another acronym.
It's another acronym.
Oh,
and please don't ask me to tell you exactly what. I only talk in acronyms, which is terrible.
Another acronym.
Yeah. So there's the TNFD. But let me tell you what I really like about the biodiversity discussion.
Okay.
We're coming up on an election, and everything gets like really politicized, right? And it makes the job difficult at times. But I think people can sometimes get uneasy talking about climate. But there is a pretty much consensus around preserving nature. So I've found it as kind of the great
we are nature.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The great combiner of, it is a critical component of mitigating the worst of what could come from a climate change.
Green infrastructure.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so
resilience.
Let's all get on the same board with preserving nature and preserving our biodiversity. So I found that to be a really positive thing to come up really quickly recently. And around workers, I still think that there is a lot to be a lot coming out around different dimensions of diversity. And so I had said cognitive diversity, right? And that goes beyond just sort of the demographics that have historically been talked about in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. It's about how do you truly get cognitive diversity at the board level throughout the workforce. And it's so much more than just tick boxing female or tick boxing like an ethnic background. It's about socioeconomic diversity. It's about ability diversity, veteran status. There are so many dimensions and life experiences that can enrich the innovation in a company. So going back to are you taking advantage of the opportunity out there in the talent pool? cast a wide net, right? And if you're not casting a wide net, you're losing out. And so I think that is not necessarily emerging, but I do see people picking up on the fact that, diversity is a fact, right? We all have different backgrounds. We all can check boxes on sheets, but it's not just about that, right? It's
more
about,
to it.
there's a real depth of diversity that we need to be looking at to understand how to pull out that innovation that companies are looking for.
That's super. I think let's leave it there, because that is a really good exclamation point in terms of kind of where the space is going and the things that you do. So, Emily, thank you so much for being a guest here on The Green Voice, and thanks for the work that you do at EOS at Federated Hermes. And thanks for coming back to Pittsburgh, too. I think that's also not to be understated, to have a boomeranger that has kind of your worldview and experience and leading and lending that to the Pittsburgh community is a real thing. So thank you for that.
Yeah, happy to be back, and I'm a proud Yinzer, and always will be.
Awesome. Thanks so much, and thank you for listening in to The Green Voice. I'm Grant Ervin with S&B USA. We'll check you out on the next episode. Have a great day.